Copyright The Son of Odin, The Shadow Esa Millila 2013-2024, Esa Millila, all rights reserved, Chapter 1. The year is 851, and it is night. Maria is about to give birth when the night became morning. The child are born, and it is a boy. Sven and Maria both decided that he should be named Erik. He has red hair and tiny freckles across his face. He has a birthmark on his cheek that looked like a crescent. Maria, who is the princess over Northland, has received its firstborn, who has freckles and red hair too. Crescent birthmark is no one who has, and this is unusual. Sven, who is the king of Northland, looks at his son Erik, sees a similarity with his wife, but tells Maria that the noble part must be from his side. Then Sven, laughing out loud. Maria, who was exhausted after giving birth, was traditionally eat a good cake, and had she withstand so much pain and suffering, can finally rest. Sven wants the biggest party in the North's history. Sven are the master of King's village. He says to his right hand Harald to arrange the festivities, and the mead must be extra strong and good. The whole village gathered with treats and food. They walked to the king's house to celebrate the newborn Erik. All with high positions had to be around the big table. There were 2 new grilled pigs, 3 grilled lambs. There was so much food that all 240 people who lived there could eat a whole week. People is drunk and dance to great music. Everyone is happy, and the people shouted hooray to Sven, and he hugged everyone one by one, and this took a long time. Finally came Lisbeth with Erik. Sven took Erik carefully and showed everyone by holding Erik high. He yelled out, "Erik!" Everyone shouting hooray and hooray. Erik is only a few hours old, looked towards the herd of people. He got a little scared and peed several yards and hit Harald right on the face. Everyone looked surprised, and Sven started laughing out loud. Harald was first sour and could not do anything but smile. Would he be angry? Sven had been insulted. Everyone laughed with Sven. Sven says, "Erik is a real man. Did you see he peed many yards? Not many adults can piss so far." Everyone started laughing even more, and people shouted hooray. Festivities continue beyond the evening and night. During the night, stories is told. One told about the beast is living at Shadow Valley by night. One says that he had seen the eyes at night and rustling around the forest. No one had seen the beast, but it is named Shadow. Then came an old lady who said she had seen it 20 years ago. It had yellow eyes and was black with yellow stripes around the body. The beast ears was split in 2, and it had a long tail that was shared at the end. She thought she saw wings too, but was not 100% sure. Zero-eyed lady named Sigrid said, "I saw the beast just a minute, but it was large and hissed at me." All listened to the old lady with the big ears, and they got big eyes. She told me things that it could not be true. Sigrid said, 50 years ago, when I was only 20 years, when the king's father named Frederick, he ordered 7 men to try to kill the beast Shadow. The brave 7 began their trek towards the Valley of the Shadow. It was afternoon, but quickly began to get dark. That's when the Shadow appears. The brave 7 found Shadow and started shooting arrows at it with the bows. The Shadow was too fast and escaped all arrows. The Shadow disappeared into the bush, and suddenly disappeared 1 man, and then the 2nd and 3rd. And finally, there was only 1 man left who had his sword up. He crawled down a bit and spun around. He looked everywhere, but he could not see the Shadow. Suddenly, the Shadow above the last man named Ivar. He looked terrified and tried to swing at Shadow with the swords. Beasts took his paw with their sharp claws and struck hard to Ivar. Ivar passed out and woke up day after, and he looked around, but no Shadow was there, and all the 6 brave men were gone. Ivar started walking towards King's village. He limped his way, and he felt that he had broken his arm. He arrived at the king's village, and he was so scared, even brave Vikings can become fearful. He told me what had happened to the king Frederick, and then decided the king to make a new wall has to be around the village. Everyone started working on cutting trees to reinforce the wall. They dig some holes to make traps, but them never got hold of Shadow, and he is still waiting out there in the night. All who heard this were so afraid that the slightest sound so jumped. The children who had listened to the old lady were so frightened that they shook the whole body, and suddenly Sven saying, "Nonsense, nothing to be afraid of. This is just fairy tales." Sven grunted, and old lady Sigrid, who was not afraid of the king, said, Beware, Sven. The beast is out there and will probably be here soon when the food runs out at Shadow Valley. Sven raised his fist and said, "How dare you speak to me? Get out from the king's village." Old Lady Sigrid, who lives outside the village, went away and said, "Beware, Sven. Shadow is coming soon. Be prepared." The king looked over the sea of people with big eyes that he was mad and yelled out, "Now the party ends. Everyone go home now." People nodded and bent against Sven, and all looked scared out and started walking home to their small houses. The kids were so frightened that they clung to their parents. The night turned into morning. Everyone slept late, for the party was a huge success. Many gathered at King's house for breakfast at all that was over. They reveled in the lamb and pork, and never in his time have people been eating such a nice breakfast at the table. Then Sigurd came running in and said to Sven, "Something awful thing has happened at night. A horse has been killed." Sven and the other rushed out to see what had happened. Inside the barn, where all the animals were collected, they found the horse's head, but nowhere did they find the body. There was a blood trail that went from the barn to the wall and went out to the woods. Then the old lady came up and said in a trembling voice, "What did I tell you? Shadows are coming." Everyone started talking to each other, and they were so frightened. Sven says, "Peace all. It could have been a bear or a wolf that has taken the horse." Then said Sigurd, "But I do not think the bear or a wolf can climb over the wall." Harald says, "This has to have been the shadow that made it. Who else can drag a 500-pound horse over the wall?" Sven decided to double the guard and have a lot-off fire near the walls to try to scare off Shadow, because he did not want it happen again. The guard kept an eye toward the forest that leads to Shadow Valley. When nightfall comes, they changed the guards, especially one named Ivar. He was blond and big. He is very nervous, and he heard a rustling in the forest edge. He sounded the alarm, and all rushed to him. Ivar shouted, "The shadow comes. Shadow is here." All men hear the rustling, and suddenly there came out a deer running from the forest edge. From above there came a yellow fireball and hit the deer. All the men were dazzled by the light, and when the light is gone, and so was the deer. The men heard some rustling in the forest, and then there was a big roar like a hawk, but 100 times higher. All guards starting to shake the bodies and was afraid. Branches were cut off, and something was eating the deer and disappears to Shadow Valley. Sven ordered 2 men to see what had happened. They both hesitated, but the king, he looked at them with angry eyes, and then they got a bit of courage to start going to the forest edge. Both take with them swords and torches to be able to see what it is. They began to approach the edge of the forest, and they saw blood on the grass and a leg of deer. They crept slowly into the forest, and they looked at each other with frightened eyes. They came to the end and saw the remains of deer and a yellowish slime that was around the trees and grass. It was almost like it was glowing and lit up the place they were at. They took a branch with little slime and run back towards the king's village. They both shouted, "Open the gate! We want to come inside." They came in with big eyes and were completely exhausted. They showed up the branch with the luminous slime. They told what they had seen. The king and all the others looked at each other and wondered what kind of monster could have such slime. Everyone agreed that there must be Shadow that has been there. The king ordered that there would be 3 double guards the rest of the night. The night turned into morning, and nothing has happened during night. Each night they had doubled the guards and lightened up the village with a lot of campfires. After 2 weeks, started life go back to normal again. Chapter 7 years have passed, and they have not heard anything more and seen more of the beast's shadow. Erik, who is now 7 years, celebrates his birthday. Sven, he arranges the finest suits and tastiest food someone can get. Mother Maria has made several fine birthday cookies to all the children in the village. The kids smile and have lots of fun. The king gives wooden sword to all children. Everyone starts to fence, also Sven join in. The kids were so happy, and Erik is so happy. Erik, he felt like a king of King's village. Erik had a particularly close friend named Eva. She has blonde hair, and Erik, he thinks Eva is mighty cute, but he has, of course, not told to her. Eva is more tomboy than a girl who likes to hit with swords and shooting bow. Erik, who never tried shooting bow, can for the first time to do it. In King's Village, there may not be children fewer than 7 years trying shooting a bow, and they can only play with wooden swords, and therefore was Erik extra cocky when he would finally shoot with a bow. Sven showed how to shoot with the bow. Erik, he tried to tighten the bow, even if the bow was made for kids. It is a mighty powerful bow. He drags the string and fired off an arrow, but it flew just a few feet. Eva, she giggled and laughed at Erik because she is 8 years and is already a master to shooting a bow. Erik was a little sour and tried again. He took aim at the target and released the string and flew far out and over the wall where it landed in the forest. Erik wanted to retrieve the arrow. Sven ordered that Sigurd would be with him. Because Erik is not like normal children, he must always be accompanied by a bodyguard. This time it was Sigurd's turn. They started to go to forest, and Eva wanted to follow to find the arrow. They came to the edge of the forest and began to look for the arrow and did not find it there. They went further into the forest, where and found the arrow on the ground. Suddenly, there was a rustling sound among the treetops, and Sigurd, he protected Erik and Eva while they looked terrified. They here see that branches from above and falls down on the ground, and frozen leaves fall over the snow. Reddish slime drips down from the trees. Then they get a glimpse of what it is. It looked like the shadow was back, but this was a little different than shadow. This beast has red eyes, black as charcoal, and red wisps around the body, and it was not as big as the shadow. It was approaching Sigurd, who protected the children. Erik, he was so scared that he urinated on himself, but Eva was a little tougher and took her bow and aim at the beast. Suddenly, they hear a big cry further away, and then came a figure running towards Sigurd and the children. Red and black beast shot off a red beam of light against the yellow and black beast that was probably Shadow. The beam landed on the front of Shadow, that stopped. Shadow looked angry towards the red and black beast. The red and black beast jumped against Sigurd and chipped away the sword while it turned at Shadow. It began to sizzle and snort to the Shadow and began running toward Shadow, and he hit Shadow so hard that yellow slime flew out everywhere. They both started fighting and shooting each other with light rays. Sigurd and the children began to running towards King's Village, when suddenly a scream came and a big explosion with a blast that was so hard that Sigurd and the kids flew back a few feet and fainted. They landed safely on the high grass. The red-black beast chased away the Shadow. It began to crawl slowly forward to Erik and licked at him. Erik, he woke up and saw 2 large red eyes staring and the slime drain from the beast's mouth. The red and black beast started jumping and leaping like a dog and waving his long tail that was 2-egged. Suddenly woke Sigurd and Eve, and he disappears into the forest with a sound. Branches were broken and leaves fall down. Then came 20 men running with Sven with swords, as they screams out like they were obsessed to scare the beast that has long since gone. Sigurd shouting, "Take it easy, it's gone, we're okay." King Sven orders to take it easy, and they stop running and walk to them. Erik tells him what had happened, and Sven sees that he has urinated on himself and taking his coat around him and says, "Okay, everyone cannot tell to anybody that Erik has peed on himself. Is that clear?" Everyone answers yes, including Eva. They looked around and saw broken trees and fire everywhere. Sigurd says, "It was Shadow and another creature that was blackish red saved us." Sven, "What? Is this true?" Erik replies, "Yes, it is true. The black and red creature saved us, and it licked me and jumped like a dog." Sven took Erik to the side and whispered in his ears, "Stay away from the creature, we know nothing about them. They are dangerous." Erik nodded as an answer. Yes. Everyone started walking slowly against King's Village and went through the gate, and Mother Maria comes running to his son Erik and yells, "Are you okay?" And she kissed and hugged him so hard that he could not breathe. Erik says, "Yes, I am Mok, but let go of me. I cannot breathe." Maria took Erik to get a bath, and he was full of red slime and dirt. She boiled some water and mixed with cold water so Erik could jump into the bath. Erik jumped in and said to his mother, "I think the red and black beast was kind and wanted to help us." Maria replied, "Maybe so, but we know they have a great power, and it can always strike at the king's village and turn it into ruins." Erik replied, "Yes, but we have to find a good name to the beast." Maria replied, "Yes, we should call it Slime. God name because the beast has a lot of red slime, as you said. Erik replied, Well, that sounds good. We call it slime. Erik smiled at his mother and gave her a big hug and went to bed. Erik lay down in his bed and could only think about slime. But eventually, he fell asleep with a big smile. The night turned into morning, and Erik was up early to eat breakfast, but neither the mother nor father was awake, so he went around in the village and met Eva, that usual shooting the bow at targets. He had not brought his new bow, but asked Eva if he could borrow hers. Eva showed how to aim, and actually he hit the target. Sven came running from his house and shouted out, Out of the way, I have to do something big. He runs to the outside toilets, and there came a big groan, and finally he shouted out, Where is my royal-ass wiper? Harold, please come to me and wipe my ass. Just kidding. He came out with a big smile and relief and said, That was great relief, but I must have lost at least 2 pounds. And he winked with his right eye at a woman who was nearby. The woman looked at him with wide eyes and started giggling at the same time hiding her mouth with the hand. Sven went to Big House and breasted up to show himself great. Erik and Eva, they laughed out loud and could not stop laughing at the king, but eventually they started to calm down. Erik said, My father is crazy, but he is so funny. Eva replied, Yes, he is cool as hell. Erik and Eva started talking about the event as they had the day before. Erik said that the beast would be called Slime. At the same time, Sven and Harald came out and they rang the big bell. Everyone gathered at the king's house to hear what the king has to say. King cleared his throat, says, Dear citizens, as you know what happened yesterday with Erik, Eva, and Sigurd, they could be killed by the beasts that were out in the forest edge. I and Harald have decided that we will send 10 men to kill these ruthless beasts. Harald shouted, If there is some out voluntary, and then Ivar shouted, I want to kill the beast, so I see this as an honor. Give me a big axe, and I'll split the beasts into 1,000 pieces, eating the monster's heart while it pumps out blood. Big cheers were heard, and quickly got the entire voluntary they wanted, and actually the majority of men who do not want to miss this great honor to kill these beasts. Erik was sorry, and he said, Please do not kill the slime he saved us from the shadow. Sven replied loudly, So beast has got a name now, let it be slime, but we will kill them beasts who try to harm our loved ones. Erik was upset and went into the house. He began to cry and was heartbroken that they would kill the beast that had saved his life. Erik heard the king shouted out, Now we celebrate the brave 10. Tonight they will be kings, and let the mead flowing high for tomorrow they will battle to save the village. The house was soon full of people, where the brave 10 are drunk, and they toasted Beatty. The women drank mead too, and felt the intoxication of the body. Harald, that's has no woman, took one that he beloved all night, like it would be the last night of his life. The night turned into morning, and Sven woke up and saw that there were lots of people sleeping everywhere. This was a really big party, and he thought that everyone would remember this rest of their life. The leaves had fallen off, and the snow began to fall. One after another of the brave 10 came to life. It smelled bad everywhere, and they took one last mouthful of mead that was left in the barrels and is ready for battle. Erik, who has been awake all night and thought of slime, went to Harald and said, Please, Harald, spare Slime's life. He saved us from the shadow, so he is not dangerous. He can help us against the shadow. Harald grunted and replied, Erik, Quiet little boy, I will make it fast when I cut of the beast head, and I promise he will not feel anything. And he laughs out loud. Erik became even more upset and runs to her mother and hugged her tightly and crying. Erik says, They will kill Slime. Harald will cut off the head of Slime. Maria tried to comfort Erik while people cheers outside. This is not easy, she thought. The brave 10 men started to walk on the heavy snow. The cheers echoed across the valley, and the neighboring village heard it and wondered what is happening, so they sent out a man to hear what it is. They sent out Rune to get information about these cheers. He started walking towards the king's village, and it is hard to walk on the new snow. He was not the preparation that it would snow and did not have winter clothes. Suddenly, there was a scream that he recognized. Chapter 3. Rune saw yellow rays of light flew over his head and hit his village. House exploded and caught fire everywhere. A man came running out with fire all over him. Rune looked desperately from distance how the man rolled over to try to extinguish the fire, but in vain. He saw a figure coming closer from the clouds. With big eyes, he saw that it was the shadow coming. The shadows are getting closer and shoot yellow light rays towards the village again, while passing over the rune that was tossed away by the pressure of the wings. He could not do anything to help the people, only see the beast destroying his village. Shadow smashed all the houses like it would small branches and slaughtered with light rays. Those who had not been killed by the light rays received a cruel death of Shadow's razor-sharp claws. Rune started running to his village and saw charred bodies at the same time, saw the beast eating his friends. But suddenly the beast turned around and looked at Rune. Blood and yellow slime came out of his mouth. Rune started to run away and fell into a huge pile of snow where he got buried under snow. The shadow was nearby and Rune heard the beast feet pounding on the ground, and he came nearer and nearer. Rune could not do anything other than be completely still and breathe as little as possible. Shadow looked around, but did not see where Rune is, but suddenly treading Shadow through the snow and almost hit him. Yellow slime covered over the snow, and it started to melt when Shadow turned to the village again. He swallowed a whole body and brought a horse with its huge claws and began to fly away when the wind from Shadow's wings blew away the snow that had been covered. Rune disappeared. Rune looked horrified at the shadow when it flew off into the valley of the shadow with a horse in its claws. The horse was still alive and whinnied and kicked to try to get free, but could not. The wind from the wings pushed all the snow down from the trees, and the snow falls down on the brave 10 who have seen it all from a distance. They run to the spot, and after a while, they are there. They are now close to Rune, who was on his knees as he cried and screamed out, "Why? All my friends are dead. Why?" Everyone saw how the shattered village was. Bodies were broken and scattered everywhere. They began to discuss how they can kill this beast. "It is indestructible," said one of the men. Harold shouted out to the men, "We must kill it before the shadow does the same thing with our village, even if it takes our lives." They started hitting each other on the shoulder, and finally they were in a trance. They hated the beast so much that they began to shout out, "For king and family! Die your beast, die!" Rune found some dry winter clothes and a sword and shouted out, "Die your best, die!" Everyone looked at each other and shouted out, "Rune, Rune!" Now these 11 brave men that starting walking briskly towards the Shadow Valley, they had lit torches because it's getting darker, and decided that they must find a good place to camp. They found a large fir that is lying on the ground. They lit a fire to warm him, and Ivar became the unfortunate to take the first watch. Rune fell asleep from sheer exhaustion at the same time. Did not take long before the rest had gone to sleep. Ivar looked around, and after a few hours, he heard rustling in the bushes, and Ivar shouted to the others to wake up. All stood up except Rune, who had gone to sleep like a pig. They saw red eyes glimpsed from the bushes, and it was Slime that looked at the men. Slime stood up on the back claws, and the men watched with wide eyes and raised the swords, but suddenly turned Slime and disappeared into the forest. Rune was still asleep, and the men wondered what had happened. They began to discuss why not Slime attacked. Discussions continued throughout the night, and they did not dare go back to sleep. It was now sunrise, and they kicked Rune, and he stood up like lightning in a clear sky. They told him what had happened during the night, but Rune did not believe them because he usually wakes up at the slightest sound. They showed the tracks that Slime had done. Rune saw an eye-opener, but did not show that he was afraid, and just waved it off and came up with excuses that it was Shadow old tracks. But finally, the men did not care about to explain anymore. They packed up to continue their journey towards Shadow Valley. They were very nervous and looked everywhere if Shadow would attack them. They came up the mountain and saw Shadow Valley. Water flows down from the mountains where it has nearly frozen. Leaves had fallen down from trees, and it looked very nice when it was mixed with snow and frozen in the ice. Small brook ran through the valley where there were plenty of trout, and the men were hungry, so 2 men jumped into the stream to catch some trout, and the others began to make fire and find a good defense position. The men captured 5 fish and hay put onto the fire. They start to eat the fish. They had walked nearly 5 hours to get to the Shadow Valley, and they were very tired. The clothes were wet and they were heavy. Everyone took the coats near to the fire so they could dry a bit and started to prepare for the worst that would happen. They looked at each other when the sun disappeared over the mountains and hurried to throw more woods on the campfire to make a really big bonfire. They had built their defense around the bonfire, and they knew that the shadow would be more active at night. They hid around the fire and waited and waited. A big shout was heard echoing in Shadow Valley. Harold said, "The shadow is here, be prepared." Chapter 4. The shadow is flying high up in the sky, and look at the brave men. The shadow is very smart. He flew away and yelled out sound as it echoed from the mountain, and the brave men turned in that direction. Shadow flew high up and escaped to clouds. Above the clouds, he flew around and attacked from behind with his light of beams. Explosions buried large part of the camp, where only Ivar and Harold that survived. The bodies are burning, and pieces is everywhere, and the snow is falling more and more. Harold shouted out, "Come on, you bastard, I'll smash your ugly face." He struck the sword on a stone so it gave a sound. The shadow came with a fierce momentum and turned out one of his claws. Harold was split in 2 pieces from the butt to the head. Ivar looked terrified and huddled down in the snow. Shadow circulated in the sky, and after a while it flew down. Of the wind from the wings extinguished all flames, and the only thing visible was the glowing yellow eyes and yellow slime from his mouth. It looked around drooling, but could not see Ivar. The beast took 2 burned bodies, 1 in each paw, and flew off into the sky. The ash falls down from the bodies like it would snow. After a few minutes, Ivar dared to look around to find survivors. He went to Harold, and he touched on him on right side of head. Ivar, he began to cry as tears cases down at Harold's body. Ivar whispered, "Live well in Valhalla. Goodbye, my friend." Harold is falling into death, and he sees Freya come down from Valhalla. The night turned into the finest summer. Freya reaches Harold, that's turned to a complete man, and goes against Freya. Freya embraced him, and the 2 flying into the sky. Harold looks for his last time down to earth with tears falling down that turns to snow before reaching the ground. Freya, our god of eroticism, love, and the goddess of fertility, takes half of the fallen in Valhalla, and it's just like Harold thought it would be. Freya takes Harold into her house called Folkvang, and where he is enjoying good food and women who take good care of him. Ivar takes Harold ring and started walking home. Ivar looked around nervously and runs out of the valley. He looked one last time over the valley and began his journey to home. Ivar hated the shadow. In every step he took, he hated Shadow more and wanted to turn around and kill the beast, but he knew that he never could beat the beast alone. While at King's Village, Erik, he was out and felt someone staring at him, and that was a feeling he got. Maria shouted out for him to eat evening meal. He came inside to King's house and said to her mother, "Mom, it feels like there is someone who follows me, but every time I turn around, it is gone." Mother replied, "When you are out there, the wind and darkness can appear as something else." Erik, he smiled and took out his spoon and ate his soup in blazing speed. Erik, he washed his face and the hands. He undressed to go to sleep, but first he looked out and saw that it was full moon. He knew when there was a full moon, it is hard to sleep at night, but after many hours of twists and thoughtful night, he fell asleep. The night became morning, and the rooster crows like mad animals also get a little crazy when it was been full moon. Erik, he wakes up and runs toward his father and mother's room. He jumps up on the bed and wakes his parents. Sven said, "Good morning. Did you sleep well, my son?" Erik replied, "No, I was mad like the animals are on full moon. Can we practice with the bow today?" Sven said, "Yes, but first we have to eat a little so we get the energy to exercise." Erik, he run down with a big smile, and the food was already in place on the table. This was Ingrid who helps in the house. Ingrid said, "Good morning, Erik. The food is served. I have baked some new bread." He jumped up on the bench and began eating as he has never seen food before, and drank some water. Then he hurried to get his bow and some arrows. He runs out to get to the area where they practice. Eva is there already. She practices with her bow and she shoots and, of course, hits on bullseye. Erik shouts, "Good morning, Eva. Can you learn how to get as good as you?" Eva replied, "Yes, but you may practice every day to become good. I am." Sven, who has just finished eating the food, comes out and sees that Erik is with Eva, and she shows how to shoot and hit the target. Sven, he thinks that he did not need to practice with Erik. He goes into the house again, and Erik feels he is being watched again. He looks around, but sees nothing. But suddenly he looks up above him and sees slime that are looking down on him. Slime notice that Erik looks at him and fly further away. Erik, he says nothing to Eva. He was thinking of slime that he cannot be dangerous for him. He was saved from shadow. Erik continues and practice with the bow. Suddenly someone is shouting from the forest. It is Ivar coming exhausted. He has walked all night. They open the door and he looks very sad and tired, and everyone knows what has happened. Sven comes running out of the house and meet up with Ivar. The tears are flowing from Ivar's eyes. He hands out the ring belonging to Harald. Meanwhile, Maria comes out from the house. Sven, who has understood what had happened without saying a word, has been sad, and he turned to Maria and show ring belonging to Harald. Maria goes down on her knees because she has lost a childhood friend, tears flowing as she takes her hands to her face and crying. Sven, he shows other emotions and start destroying things. He kicks at barrels with mead and eventually goes away into the house where he screams out. Erik and Eva, wondering what's going on, and come to Ivar and asks what happened. Ivar, who have not rested, and says, "Harald is dead and all of them were slain by the shadow." Maria enters the house to go to Sven. They hug each other, and after a few minutes, Sven goes out and wants to hear the whole story. He begins with a neighboring village was completely butchered and destroyed, where only one who had survived there. He tells us how they arrived at the Shadow Valley and how quickly everyone was killed, and how Harald was killed right in front of Ivar's eyes. Sven, he runs to the bell and calling it like crazy. The most people have arrived at King's house. He ordered the killing of Shadow and gives 100 silver coins to who killed the beast and ordered that this would spread throughout Northland. 5 men took out the horses and some food with them. They jump up on the horses and spread out the message. At the same time, he orders Sigurd bringing home 500 men from Berserker Guard, who is stationed at Lindisfarne. Sigurd took the fastest horse. It would take 2 days by horse to get to the coast, and then he had to take a boat trip one day. Sigurd takes food for a few days. Sigurd has long black hair all the way to his butt. Maria and she tell Sigurd, "Ride as fast as you can see and don't look back." Sigurd nods to Maria and takes his last mouthful of mead and yells, "For Odin," and hits the cup down hard on the table. Sven knew that the Berserk Guard would be at King's village in a week. Sven gathered all the men to patrol the edge of the forest. All women and children helped to collect firewood. Sven wanted to burn everywhere, so they see at night. He orders the blacksmith to forge the best spears available. They should be 3 meters long and have the hardest steel on the tip. Blacksmith begins to work throughout the night. Everyone hears the way he strikes the steel, and the lights from his hammer and fire are visible across the village. Each time he strikes are the sparks flying around, and with his helper, who will throw out the water so it does not ignite. The night turned into morning, and blacksmith comes to the king's house, showing up 10 spear that was worthy of the best warrior in the land. Sven came out to see these spears. Sven says, "These spears will penetrate deep into the shadow's body and honor the brave 10 who gave their lives." Everyone who saw them and heard this shouted hooray and hooray. Sigurd, who has come a long way, takes a little break to eat. He notices that there is something staring at him. He hurries to the horse and starts getting high speed when he notices that there are wolves chasing him. One is all black with glowing eyes and sees that it is not normal wolves. They look like demons with big sharp teeth and drooling as they have not been fed in years. They are getting closer and closer. Ivar takes his sword and cuts to the first attempts to bite the horse. The horse panics and stands on its back legs. Ivar falls off the horse and lands on his back, and he runs out of breath. He sees the wolves begin to surround him and the horse. Chapter 5. He stands up and begins to wield the sword against the wolves that come closer and closer as he tries to regain his breath. Suddenly, a shape appears with the furious pace. It is God Skadi that comes rushing down from the mountain with her skis. She puts 4 arrows on his bow and releases the string and hits 4 wolves, while swoosh past the wolves and pick up arrows from the wolves who are dead, and charge 3 arrows and shoots. The arrows hit 3 of the wolves, while an arrow goes straight through and hit one right on the head. A wolf begins to howl and look at the other wolves. They slopes and eventually goes away deep in the forest. The god Skadi comes and pick up her arrows and look at Ivar with a smile and blink with one eye while she goes away up the mountain with tremendous momentum with a glow. Ivar could not believe his eyes when he saw this. It went so fast, and never has he seen a god helping or heard about it. He thinks that something must be out of balance, and therefore the gods are helping. He rubs the eyes and sees where the horse is. He sees the horse a little further and sees how stressful it is. Ivar goes to the horse and tries to calm down and pulls out a carrot and the horse takes it. Ivar jumps on the horse and starts riding off to his goal. Outside the wall of the king's village, the people digs the pits to lay traps in case the shadow comes back. When they have finished digging large pits, they put some piles and make them pointy. They lay on thin branches and some leaves and snow. Sven supervises all work. All people are helping and the women bake bread. Some of the men go out to fish and some go out to hunt wild boar or deer. 2 days have passed and Ivar have come to the bridge, and there is a smaller boat that will take him out to Lindisfarne, where Berserker Guard is. He jumps into the boat and leaves the horse for an attendant. Suddenly, the owner of the boat and asks why he is here. Ivar showing his ring and orders that he be transferred to Lindisfarne to fetch king's soldiers. The ring has the king's coat of arms on, and the boat owner does not hesitate a second, and he starts to row out from the strait and set sail. The sea is calm and the wind is just right, and they estimate that they will be there until morning. Now it's morning, and they are not far away. They see the camp with all the soldiers. The boat comes in slowly. Fog lightning and Ivar blowing on his horn, and then the soldiers know that someone important arrives. 50 men are waiting for Ivar to arrive the bridge. The bridge holds 30 large boats. He arrives at the dock and welcomed by Gunnar, who is the one who controls the Berserker Guard. Ivar recognized Gunnar from before. They walk to the big house where Gunnar lives with his friends that are high-ranked. Ivar is treated very well and give him some good food and mead to drink. He is mighty hungry during the trip, and he has only eating the dry bread. He eats fast and drinks mead so it runs down on the beard. He takes a deep breath and explains why he's there, and he needs 500 men to fight Shadow at Shadow Valley. Gunnar does not hesitate a second, and he already has too many men in his camp and happy to offer Ivar the men to him. Furthermore, it is the king's soldiers. They plan to go across the lake early in the morning. They eat more food and mead. Ivar, who has not slept so much, decided to go and get some rest. During the night, it starts blowing up a storm. Now it's morning, and the soldiers wake up, and one of them blows the horn so the rest wake up. Ivar wakes up and sees that the soldiers begin to get ready to travel across. All 500 soldiers go on the boats that are in the dock. The wind is stronger, and there are big waves out on the ocean. They come halfway, and one of the boat that is old and not so safe and starts to fall apart. The sail goes into 1,000 pieces and nails from the board start coming out. The boat taking water and eventually begins to capsize. Suddenly, a woman appears from the sea, and some of the men are enchanted by her beautiful face. The men in the boat are screaming to them, "Do not go to her." They try to come to the rescue, but 8 men are so enchanted by the woman who pulls them down to the ocean floor with her fishing net. Gunnar says, "It was God Ran that attracts people and takes it with them to the realm of death." Ivar says, "The gods are beginning to show themselves, and they helped me to the wolves that were chasing me." Gunnar says, "If the gods are interferes, it is much more serious than we thought." They boats arrive to the bridge, and soldiers come out of the boats. Gunnar he will not go with him, and waving to Ivar and says, "Be careful, and not to set up camp inside the forest. Camp out on the open field. Wolves and creatures live inside the forests." Ivar he jumps on his horse, and the soldiers must travel by walking. He waves goodbye to Gunnar, who take the boat back to Lindisfarne. Ivar and the soldiers began their journey to King's village, and they will be through death forests where wolves are wasar. With so many soldiers believe that they will do just fine, said Ivar. After many hours of walking, it's getting dark, so decided Ivar that they would set up camp for the night. They camped, and 50 guards are at patrol around the night, and then suddenly the heaven open and night go to daylight in a second. The soldiers woke up to the light. Everyone looked up and saw a sight that no one had ever seen before. The godod looked down and began to cry red gold over soldiers who quickly running into the forest to avoid being hit. The godod roared with deafening voice, "Where is my wife Freya? Come to me." The ground shook with the pressure of Od's mouth and smelled like dead horse. Suddenly, one of the soldiers starting to shake and froth coming from his mouth, and light blue light coming out from the mouth, and he explodes. Freya shows up and yells at her husband, Od, "Can't you see that I'm working?" She shakes her head as she looks at the soldiers who are behind the trees. She lifts up from the ground, stretching out her arm, and disappears in the light. The clouds come back together, and it is night again. They do not believe their eyes. They stand with their mouths open and rub their eyes and cannot believe this has happened. Discussions begin among, but eventually they begin to walk slowly towards their camp, where all weapons is scattered everywhere. One of the soldiers takes the gold-red tear, for he believes it is real gold, but before Ivar can warn him, he takes it. The gold-red mass starts eating up the soldier, and it solidifies into... Everyone looks terrified out, and one of the soldiers goes back and pokes it with his spear and suddenly explodes into 1,000 pieces, and red pebbles are scattered everywhere. The soldiers start digging soil over the gold-red tears, and they see that the sun is coming up. They collect their stuff and starts walking towards King's village. While in King's village, Maria sees how worried Sven gets. She tries to calm down, and he points out that it's been 5 days ago Ivar traveled away. Sven replied uneasily, "What if he has not come to Lindisfarne?" Sven went back and forth and said, "Damn must take a piss." He went out to pee so he could calm down. Maria goes up from the bed and begins to arrange breakfast. Erik wakes up and he runs out and brings with him the bow, and then Sven, whose halves pissed finish, says, "Where are you going, Erik?" Erik said, "Can we go out and hunt today, Dad? I want to get out and hunt. Can I please?" Sven replies, "You know it's dangerous out there, but if we take 5 men with us, then we can go out in a little while." Erik is so happy and jumped for joy and run to Eva's house to tell him the news and ask Eva if she would come and hunt with him. Eva replied with a smile, "Yes, please. Let me make ready so I come in a moment." Erik, he was so glad he went back and forth. Sven told the news to Maria that was not happy. Maria with sour face, "You know it's dangerous out in the forest now, when the shadow is on the warpath." Sven said, "I have already promised Erik, and we also need lots of meat to feed the soldiers to come." Sven looked at Maria as a dog usually begs for food. Sven knew that Maria could not resist this, and she nodded yes. Maria gave Sven a kiss. Sven ordered 5 men to enter the chase and told them that they must keep track of Erik all the time. Erik and Eva were already at the gate and smiled from ear to ear. The door opened and they walked out of the forest, and Sven said to Erik, "Stay close to me all the time." Erik replied, "Yes, I am like a tail of a rat." They began to go deeper into the forest where fog began to arrive. Sven said, "Stay close to me, the fog getting thicker." They nodded and went further in, and suddenly they heard a crash. They thought they were a boar that making grunting noises. Sven is showing signs that they should stop and be silent. He pointed to the northeast to see where the sound is coming from. The fog is getting denser, and all they hold together, but suddenly they cannot see Erik. Erik is shouting at them. Sven, he shouts back, "Stay where you are and shout so we know where you are." The sounds bounced off the mountains and the trees, so it is almost impossible to know where Erik is. Erik, who has been shouting for 10 minutes, started to move before he gets cold. He suddenly notices that one foot cannot move and try to pull it up. Now both foots are stuck. He ended up in a swamp, and the more he's moving so quickly, he drops down. He shouts for help, and Sven, they hear he's just a little vague. Sven shouts, "Hold on, continue and shout." Erik, he's trying to get loose, but he is sinking ever faster and is down to the waist now. The fog is so thick that he can only see a few feet ahead. He shouts for help and trying to come up, and this just makes him sinking ever faster. He takes one last breath and sinking like a stone, and only one arm stands straight up, and he panics and waving with one hand above. Chapter 6. Suddenly above the wind blows, and it's someone who pulls up he gently. It is something that keeps him on the waist. He comes up to the surface and flies up in the air. It is slime that has taken him and holding Erik with both claws and clamped gently. Erik, who has lost the air, knows nothing what happens. Slime beats its wings to get up and the fog pulls aside. Erik is unconscious and sees someone with other eyes that are looking at him. He sees the lightning from the swamp and get air. Erik wakes up and looks straight into the slime's eyes and sees how they fly to the mountain. He faints out again and look through slime's eyes, how they approach the mountain. He sees how he lands and put himself on the ground gently, while Erik wake up a little. Slime walks around and poking at Erik with his nose. After a while, Erik wakes up. He looks at Slime that looks at the forest, and suddenly Slime turns his head toward Erik. He goes to Erik and pushes him to get up. Erik is a little scared and looking around to see if he can go down somewhere. Erik starts freezing of all water and dirt. He is shaking. Slime notices it and shoots a beam of light on a few woods that are close, and they catch fire. Slime, he pushes Erik to get closer to the fire. Slime, he looks towards the forest at the Shadow Valley all the time, and then he notices that Slime has a similar half moon on the face, similar like him. He goes up gently and Slime settles down. Erik goes to Slime carefully and feel the crescent with his fingers. Slime sounds like a cat purring, but much higher. Slime lies on his back, and it seems that he wants to be itched on the stomach, believed Erik. Erik itches on Slime's stomach, and he purrs even higher. And suddenly it occurs again to Erik. He sees with Slime's eyes and watching at himself when red eyes start that glow. He removes his hand and wondering what is happening. Erik shaking and thinking something is wrong. Suddenly runs Slime out on the edge and look out towards the forest. Erik goes after Slime and he sees full of small fires that move in the woods. Erik, he knows what it is and tells Slime, "It's probably my father who is looking for me." What am I saying? Slime doesn't understand anything what I say. He is an animal, and they cannot talk. Slime look at Erik and spines and shows with his head that Erik shall jump up on his back. Erik, he hesitates first, and after a while, he jumps up gently. He takes hold of the split ears, and Slime begins to flapping his wings. Suddenly it happens again, and he sees with Slime's eyes. They flying in the clouds and fly to the king's village, where they land gently and noiselessly at the forest edge. Erik, he jumps off Slime, and he sees himself with red glowing eyes as soon as he let go. Slime bumps to Erik that he should go home, but Erik, he hesitates because he is so curious about Slime and want to stay with him. Slime bumping harder and fly away and look down towards Erik, and finally he disappeared in the clouds. Erik begins to slowly walk towards the gate of the guard, yells out, "Who are there? Show yourself!" Erik walks to the gate, and the light from the fire show his face, and they give order to open the gate. One of the guards run to the king's house and talk to Maria that her son is back. Maria runs down towards the gate and embraces Erik and squeezes hard. Maria cries, so it almost sounds like she is laughing. The guard's starting to blow the horn so it echoes across the forest. Sven hears this and orders the others to continue to look after Erik, and gives a signal if they can come to King's village. Sven rushing through the forest and arrive at the gate where the guards open the gate fast, and there he sees Erik and Maria hugging each other. Sven yells to Erik and Maria. They turn around and see Sven. He runs and hugs Erik, and there will be a group hug. The guards look at each other and wonder why they do not say anything, and suddenly said, "Erik, I want to go inside and take a bath. I'm cold." Sven carries Erik and Maria make arrangements bathwater. Erik arrives. He undresses and jumps in. Maria takes a sponge and wash him on the back and see a few stripes that are there, and she thinks, "Oh no." Erik looks at his mother and sees that she gets a strange facial expression. Erik says, "What is it, Mom? Why do you look so strange?" Maria is in her own world and jerks and replies, "It's nothing," and scrub Erik's back harder. Erik shouts out, "Mom, stop, it hurts." Maria gets big eyes and stops with scrubbing and says, Sorry, I did not mean to. I was just in my own world. Maria, she gets up and walks out. Tears start flowing. Sven is looking outside when tears flowing from her eyes and says, "What is it? Is there something wrong?" Maria waving her arms and hurries out of the house, and Sven he waves his arms and shrugs with shoulder and says, "What's going on here?" Erik he goes out the bath and dries off and gets dressed and sees if there is any food because he has not eaten in a while. He finds some boiled eggs and a bit of bread that he eats fast. Erik he is completely exhausted of all that has happened. He goes to his bed and falls asleep fast. Sven he comes into his room and stroking his hand against Erik's cheek and smiles and is happy that he is alive. Sven goes down to look for Maria. He looks everywhere and doesn't find Maria anywhere. He gives orders to the guards to look for Maria. Sven goes to the house and look for a second time, but do not see her anywhere. Sven thinks, where could she have gone? Erik he fell asleep really hard and began to dream strange dreams that he was alone on top of a volcano, and the volcano spurted red fire. He dreams that he is flying and looking down towards the king's village. He flies up into the air and spins around and dive down and see the fire that looks like a fire serpent out in the woods when he gets closer. He sees that there are soldiers and Ivar that are the fire serpent. Erik wakes up and he sweats. The room is glowing red. He gets fast dry and the room is normal again. Erik thinks, what was it? The whole room was red. Erik he jumped out of bed and screaming for mom, but no response. Then Sven asks, what's going on? Erik replies, I just had a small nightmare. Erik smiled a little. Erik and Sven went down together, and then Erik said, can we practice with the sword? Sven thought, this could get Erik in thinking other than what he has been through, and replied, of course we can. And he smiled. Erik took out 2 tree swords and gave a sword to his father. The two stood together and they start beating on each other's swords. They jump on the table and fencing with the wooden swords. Sven do strumming sound with his mouth so it'll sound like metal. Erik he smiles and laughing. Sven noticed that Erik has talent, and Erik he parries every blow. Erik fencing with sword like a true champion as if he had been practicing for more than 20 years. Sven was a bit confused, but just thought positively that he has such a good son. They were getting a bit tired and began slack off a bit, and they came up to maybe shoot a little bow and set up a target indoors. And at first it was Sven who would shoot an arrow. He pulled up and took aim the arrow. He hit the edge of the target. Erik takes the bow and put the arrow on the string. He pulls on the string and notice how red the hand becomes. Sven looks only at the target plate where Erik releases the string and the arrow hits the target. Sven he looked surprised and said, it is good, you hit the bullseye. Erik he smiled and Sven goes to target. The arrow is stuck and he must use forces in order to pull it out. Sven he gets a little confused and thinking, what is this? Erik he looked at his hand and hides it quickly. He thinks, Dad cannot see my hand, and says, I am really tired and must go to sleep. Sven replied, good night, my son. But he thought very much about what had happened. Erik he throws off his clothes and jumps into bed, where he falls asleep fast. Sven he goes to see if he can find Maria, but there is no trace. He looks up to the sky. It is black and full of stars. Suddenly he sees a flash of light that illuminates the entire king's village and the lands deep in the forest. It was like it is daylight for a second, so bright it was. Those who are out there had seen the flash of light and came over to Sven. Sven says, be sure to double the guards, there may have been the shadows. Everyone is nervous and looked if they saw something at the forest edge. The flashlight disappears into the forest. Chapter 7. Maria is out in the forest and hears a violent blow nearby and sees a great light and the snow are falling from the trees. Maria looks with big eyes when she will see what it is. It is the god Odin, the most powerful of them all. He looks towards Maria with a smile. Maria gets furious. Odin says, hello, my beautiful Maria. It was a long time since we was together. Maria replies, I understand what you want. It's Erik, right? Odin responds, well, you know whose son he is? Maria said in a loud voice, yes, sure, I know that. It was just one night when we're together. Sven was gone for 3 months, so I know that Erik is your son. Maria took a branch and started beating on Odin, and it got broken in 2 pieces. She went down on her knees and began cry and say, "What will happen to my son?" Odin responds, "Erik is a demigod but has great power and it will increase more. You don't need to be worried about his safety. His half-sister, he supervises him every day." Maria responds wondering, "What? Half-sister? Who is it? Are she in the village?" Odin, he smiled and replies, "It's the one you people call slime. She changes shape to the creature when she is outside Valhalla. Erik is human form on the earth, and together they complement each other." Maria says anxiously, "Sven may not know that Erik is not his son." Odin says, "He will know the due course of his time." Maria says, "Sven will kill me if he finds out." Odin says, "Just yell my name and I will help you." Odin, he begins to explain why Shadow is Evil One, and that she managed to escape from Valhalla, where she was imprisoned, and real name is Skade. Odin says, "I have to go now, but yell my name if you need help." Odin waved to Maria and disappeared with a flash of light up to Valhalla. Maria walking towards King's village, where she enters through the gate, and Sven comes rushing against Maria. Sven says, "Where have you been, woman? We have been looking for you everywhere." Maria replies, "I was afraid that we almost lost Erik and wanted to be alone for a while." Sven replies, "Next time you do this, you must say to me, 'I have been worried and looking for you.'" Maria nodded and went into the house to Erik's room, where she sat down beside the bed and stroked Erik's cheek, and the tears began to fall from Maria's eyes. She began to cry so much that the sound was too loud, so she runs out of Erik's room and comes into her room, where she lies down on the bed crying. The night turns to morning, and Maria has not slept. She has made breakfast for everyone and wakes up Erik, who gets a big hug from his mother. Maria says, "Good morning and hope you have slept well. There's breakfast ready at the big room downstairs." Erik replies, "Good morning, Mother. Well, I have never slept so well before, and I'm very hungry." They both go down and start to eat food and smiles and laughs. Maria takes an egg and stuffs it full in the mouth and tries to say, "Good eggs." But it sounds just mumbling, and she starts laughing, so the eggs fly out of her mouth into 1,000 pieces scattered all over the table. Erik, he takes his hands over his face in order not to break out in laughter. Sven walks into the room and sees that they both have really fun and smiles and wonders if he can join the fun. Maria and Erik nods and look at each other. They start to throw food on Sven. Sven comes running out from the house, and Maria and Erik throwing eggs at Sven, and the people around look at them with wide eyes. "Sven," he shouts, "No problem, peoples. We have only a little family time here." And laugh out loud. They rush into the house and continues with food fight. After a while, they find no more food and start to calm down. Erik, he says, "Mom and Dad, I've never had so much fun before," and gave them two a big hug, and everyone smiled from ear to ear. They began to wash up and change clothes. Then a guard comes in and says, 7 men standing outside the main gate, and they want to get into the village." Sven, he runs out and goes up the tower, which is close to the main gate, and looks down on them. They have weird clothes that are black, and he asks, "What do you want, and who are you?" One of the men named Johan says, "We are a few poor men who just need a little food and rest to continue our walk." Sven, he orders to open the gate, and the guards standing ready and see that they have no weapons, but carries the cross necklace and quickly understand that they are Christians. Sven welcomes the guests, asking them to come into the house, and says to Ingrid to give them some food, and 5 guards are following them inside. Sven says, "Help yourself and eat until you are satisfied. Then you can be our evening's guests when we're having a little party." They nod and thank Sven, and Johan says, "You're a good man, and we bless this food." Before they begin to eat, they start to pray and thanking for the food and bless Jesus and God. Sven looks with big eyes when they began to pray. Sven goes to a guard named Ola, and he takes him on the shoulder, and they go a little further away and whisper something in his ear. Ola, he nods and takes 2 of the guards and goes out. The 7 men started eating, and Sven goes to them. Sven says, "Eat and enjoy food, drink some mead." Johan, he replies, "We cannot drink mead, just wine." Sven asks, wondering, "What is wine?" Johan replies, "Wine is made from grapes, and it's the only thing we can drink, because Jesus could turn water into wine." Sven looks annoying out and says, "Who is Jesus? Is it your king?" Johan, he responds in a calm voice, "Jesus is God's child, and he is the ancestor of Christianity." Sven becomes more increasingly annoying, and then Erik comes to Sven wondering who these men are. Sven, he whispers to Erik, and he runs up to his room. Sven goes out, and after a few moments, he comes in with 10 men with swords in their hands, and they start hitting them hard and pulling them out of the house as they plunge to the mud. The Christians begin to understand what is happening and begin to pray for their God. Sven becomes furious and yells, "Cut off the heads and throw them into the forest." The guards look at each other and screaming for Odin, and they cut off their heads except Johan. He is crying and begging for his life. Sven goes to him and kicks him in the mud and says, "I am the king of this country, and here is no Christian welcome. Go now to your Jesus and tell him that all Christians who come into my country will have the same treatment." Erik, he has seen everything from a hole in the wall, and he is shocked, and Maria comes rushing in and asks what happened. Erik tells what he has seen, tears flowing down his cheek, and the body begins to shake with fear. Maria tries to calm him, and eventually he becomes calm and sits down on his bed. Erik sees that his mother gets angry, and she runs down to Sven, and she has brought a broom, which she strikes Sven on the head so the broom is in 2 pieces. Sven calls out, "Are you crazy, woman? What's the matter with you?" All men look at Maria with big eyes. Maria shouts out, "Hey, do you know what just happened?" Sven replies, "What is it? What has happened that makes you crazy, woman?" Maria replies, "Erik has seen all that you have done with these poor men, and he is totally in shock." Sven, he becomes completely still and looks up where he sees Erik's eyes through a hole. Sven gets sad because he has exposed him for such a cruelty, but he cannot show those for others that he is sorry. Sven says, "They are Christians, and they deserve this. No one should come here and preach someone else's faith. We live for Odin." Maria shouts out, "Odin, yes, that son of," and she calms down before she says too much. Maria goes into the house and yells out, "Tonight you sleep outside." Sven looks at all people and gets angry and shouts, "No one closing me out of my own home." He goes against the house and trying to open the door, but Maria has locked the door from inside. Sven, he gets angrier and looks towards the people and shouts out, "What are you looking at? Do your job." The guard goes away and the women run into their houses and lock the doors. Not Eva, who says to Sven, "Men, what do we need them for?" She turns around and walks towards her house. Sven shouts of rage and starts beating at the outside toilet, where a man comes running out with his pants down and stumble and fall into the pigs. Sven gets in a little better mood and starts laughing out loud. After a while, he sits outside his house and thinking. He sits there until it becomes night. The door opened and Erik comes out and gives him a hug. Sven, he starts to cry and apologize to Erik that he had seen the cruel things. Erik grabbed his hand and he takes him into the house, and Maria standing there when they arrive. Sven, he looks down at the ground and he is ashamed. Maria comes to him and both Erik and Maria hug him and immediately are all in a better mood. They want to have a feast, and Sven, he says, "Yes, we will arrange a party before the soldiers arrive, and it may be the last party in a long time." Erik and Maria nods. Sven goes out and yells out, "Now we will party. Everyone is invited to a party at my house." He rings the bell and the people come with the bread and mead. Everyone started drinking mead and eating good food. They bowl and all the men ate like pigs. They has food in their beards. They belched and farted. The women looked at them and shook with their heads. Suddenly they hear horns blowing. All men run out and up in the towers and wondering what is happening. Sven asks, "What's going on here?" Guard named Rurik says, "See far away, there is a long fire snake." The ground begins to shake more, and Sven shouts, "All men to arms and take your positions." Chapter 8. All men rush to fetch their swords, bows, and they occupy their positions and look at each other and wondering what is happening. Erik is alone in his room, then he suddenly gets red eyes and sees what is happening with slimes when he is flying in the clouds. Erik's veins glow red like slime does, and he starts controlling slime and dive into the woods and see that Berserk Guard is very close. The soldiers look at slime and they start shooting arrows at him, but they miss. Erik, he controls slime to King's village and climb up to the roof through a hatch. Maria, who is outside, looks at Erik that's shining and she is almost in shock. Maria sees that everyone is focused on Fire Snake and sees how slime lands on the roof gently, and Erik jumps up on the neck. He grabs the split ears, and they fly away. Maria takes her hand to her mouth. She wants to shout out, and a friend sees that Maria is almost breaking out in tears. The friend called Hilda embracing Maria and looks around and takes her into the king's house. There she breaks down and tells her everything about Erik. Sven is not the father of Erik, it's Odin. She also tells how she was alone and met Odin one night, and they were together and did not think there would be children. Hilda, she gets completely shocked and says, "You have to tell Sven about this." Maria answers, "No, you must not say anything to Sven or any other about this." Hilda, she sat down on the floor and says, "Okay, I will not say anything to anyone, but he will know it sooner or later. Erik is a demigod, and that he cannot hide forever." Maria replies, "I'll try to keep secrets as long as I can. I can take Erik away and escape from here." Hilda says, "It does not solve any problems, but think about it." Maria replies, "Yes, I'll think about it." A flash of light lightened up the sky and exploding on Fire Snake. Erik gets closer to Fire Snake and see that Shadow is there and killing the soldiers. He looks with Slime's eyes and sees a strange creature that goes quietly. He points at the soldiers with a sword and knocks them gently with the sword, and it seems that no one sees this creature. All the men who have made contact with the creature die from a strike from Shadow. Slime lands on the ground, and Erik then suddenly turns the creature to Erik and rushes towards him. Slime bumping Erik, and he falls down on the ground. Slime shoots off his red beam of light towards the creature that eventually goes away towards the woods. The shadow follows the creature. The soldiers are concentrating at Slime and Erik. Soldiers shoot arrows at them. Erik, he takes hold of Slime and jumping up, and Slime while flapping its wings hard to arrows flying in all directions. The soldiers take cover to avoid being hit by arrows, and Slime lifts up to the air. They fly around and circulate in the air. The soldiers are wondering what it was strange dragon with a little boy. Slime and Erik disappear from there and fly towards the high mountain beyond. The soldiers start to take care of their wounded and dead. Ivar had seen it all, and he knew that Erik was with Slime. Suddenly, a man comes and takes into Ivar far into the woods, and Ivar yells out, "What do you want with me?" A light appears from the man's body and spreads around him, and when the light is gone, Ivar sees another man he did not recognize. Ivar, he jumps backwards and is really nervous. Ivar yells out, "Who are you and what do you want?" Ivar retrieved the sword, and the man waving his arms so that the sword from Ivar's hand flies off and lands a little further away. The man shouts out, "Do not you know who I am?" Ivar responds with shaky voice, "Who are you?" The man says, "I am Odin, the one you pray to every night." Ivar looks at the man and gets big eyes while he goes down on his knees. Odin says, "I know that you saw the little boy that is with Beast." Ivar answers nervously, "Yes, it's Erik, right?" Odin answers, "Yes, it is Erik. He's my son." Ivar was wondering and just had to say something to Odin as he waved his arms, and from Ivar's mouth full with worms. Every time he spits out, there come more worms from the mouth. Odin says, "If you tell someone that you have seen, you will spit worms rest of your life." Odin waved his hand again. Ivar, he vomits out lots of worms. He is on all fours and vomiting out and almost gets no air, but in the end he feels that he has vomited clear and gets up and he looks around. Odin is gone without a trace. Ivar takes his sword and begins to walk towards the soldiers. The soldiers watched Ivar's that he has white face, and one shouted out, "Ha ha, you are not a Viking that cannot see blood without vomiting." Ivar became angry and struck him with his fist straight in the face, and the soldier fell down. The others looked at Ivar with big eyes and showed respect for him. Everyone took their weapons and began to continue walking towards the king's village. The king's village had seen Shadow fought. Fire Serpent was broken, but suddenly it became whole again and began to approach the king's village. The men who saw this became frightened when Fire Snake came closer. Eventually they hear the horn being blown, and the men begin to calm down. Sven comes up in the tower when he recognized the sound of horns blowing and says to Sven, "Is Berserker Guard already here? They should not be here yet? They must have walked fast." Sven orders to light the extra wood so they can see where to go. Meanwhile, up in the mountain look Slime and Erik down at the soldiers and how they light the wood that lights up the king's village. Erik knows how he starts to feel love for Slime and hugs him. Erik looks deep into Slime's eyes and sees another figure who is not Slime. He sees a young girl who is about twice as old as he. Erik backs up and Slime gives out a smile that Erik has not seen before. He wonders what is happening and why they are related. Slime bumping Erik lightly, and he caresses his head and jumping up on her back. Slime and Erik is more glowing than before. Odin has seen it all from a distance, and he is glad that Erik and Slime have found each other. He now knows that Erik's forces are stronger than ever. He asks Hugin and Munin that are the ravens to keep an eye on them. Slime lifts up and stands on back legs and begins to beat his wings and starts to fly. They fly through clouds, and Erik, he does not freeze because the red veins do not make him get cold. They take a trip to the Shadow Valley and lands on top of a mountain where they see the shadow and the creature they saw before. The creature looked like a man, but is completely white on face, big black eyes, and a long skirt that is black. He has a special sword that he recognizes. Erik remembers how the old lady Sigrid told of a creature during combat, pointing out which ones to die and take them to the kingdom of death. Erik whispered in Slime's ear. The creature is a Valkyrie named Skogul and seems to interact with a shadow. Slime, he looks down on them and shows up their sharp teeth. Erik, he calms Slime, they step back and flies away to the king's village. The shadow turns quickly towards Slime and Erik and shoots a beam of light. Erik, he feels that something is not right and draws on Slime's left ear, and at the last second turns Slime left and the beam misses them. Erik, he turns his head toward the shadow. The shadow is lifted from the ground. Skogul, he eventually goes away suddenly, the shadow chasing Erik and Slime through the valley where they try to escape the shadow, but he follows them closely. Erik, he turns his head and points to the shadow. A red smoke comes from Erik's mouth and hits the shadow that loses air. Shadow spins around and lands into the lake where he goes through the ice. Slime take Erik up in the air, where they see the shadow swimming under the ice while ice bursting overhead. Shadow shoots a beam of light that will allow the ice explodes, and Shadow comes up while screaming loudly, so all the ice explodes. Shadow looks around but does not see them and fly away further into the valley. Erik and Slime is now above the clouds, where they are not visible, and they land just outside King's Village. Erik says goodnight to Slime and gives her a hug and strokes on her head. Slime looks at Erik as like she cared about someone and say goodbye. Erik, he goes against King's Village, and when comes near the gate, where Sven is waiting for the soldiers in the tower, he sees that Erik comes and calls out, "Open up the gate." Erik is there outside. "What do you do outside wall, Erik?" Erik shouts back, "Can't I take a piss?" He smiled at Sven. Sven comes down and meets him at the gate, and Sven says, "You know it's dangerous out there. Promise me you piss on inside the wall next time," and took his hand on Erik's head, stroked it. Erik replies, "Yes, yes, I promise." They both looked at each other and smiled. Erik went into the house to go sleep, where he met his mother, who looks sad, and hugs Erik. They say goodnight to each other and go to bed. Erik was a little confused about his mother, who has been acting strange the last few days. But Erik was so exhausted after all the adventures that he had been through and fell asleep almost instantly. Chapter 9. Erik, he began to dream, but the dream felt like it was for real. He sees how Slime circulates among the clouds and sees with her eyes looking down towards Berserker Guard, coming ever closer to King's Village. Slime see how Shadow comes at high speed close to the ground as spit out yellow fire at the men. They scream out in pain, and Erik sees people roll around in the snow to extinguish the fire. As fast as the shadow came, it disappeared. Now they have lost many men again, and Ivar were completely worn out. Erik sees how everyone rushes out of the king's village to help put out the fire on the burning bodies. They rolls in snow to try to extinguish the fire, but the yellow slime to cling onto the bodies and burning until there is no slime. Erik wakes up and is quite warm on the body and sweats as it pours from all points of the body. Erik sees through the hole from the room and sees how it burns in the forest. The flames are higher than the treetops. He sees how wounded men brought into the village, and the people pour water on them to cool down the bodies. Some are so badly damaged that they are only bones and burning flesh. Erik rushes out, but Maria stops him to go out and hold him tightly. Maria says, "We cannot do anything. Those who are injured do not have long to live. The yellow slime is to corroding the flesh, and water makes it worse." Erik gets angry, and Maria sees how his eyes get redder, and they start to shine. Erik, he screams out in anger in a language that no one has heard before. Maria tries to calm down, and she says, "Calm down. If they hear you or see you like this, they will try to kill you." Erik, he began puffing and groaning and collapsing in his mother's arms. Erik looks toward his mother's eyes and asks wonderingly, "What is happening to me?" Maria says, "Shh, we go somewhere else so we can talk." Maria takes Erik's hand, and they start to sneak out of the house. They men outside are busy helping the men that are injured. They walk to the wall and go through a hole. They crawl through gently and run out and enter to the forest. Little further inside the forest, Maria says, "You are not an ordinary boy, but you're special." Erik, he asks wonderingly, "What do you mean? What's wrong with me?" Maria replies, "How can I say this? Sven is not your father." And Maria begins to shake all over and tears flowing. Erik looks at his mother and tries to say something, but do not get out a word. In the end, he says, "What? Sven is my father." He pulls his hand away from Mother's hand. Maria looks at Erik, and she takes her hands on her face and crying and shaking all over. Erik gets angry, but he is sorry for all the new information he has received. Maria calms down a little and says, "Please, Erik, listen to